recounts his career supplying eavesdropping devices to the FBI, CIA, and DEA. His new book is Odyssey of an Eavesdropper, and he spoke about it recently at Brooklyn Central Library in New York for an hour.
Martin Kaiser is president of Martin L. Kaiser Incorporated, an electronics company located in Cockeysville, Maryland, specializing in the manufacture of electronic eavesdropping devices, bomb detection, and improvised explosive device detection equipment. Wow. Kaiser's clients have included the FBI, CIA, DEA, Secret Service, Army, Navy, and Air Force intelligence services of Egypt, Argentina, and Canada. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, he was a senior research technician at RCA Laboratories in Princeton, New Jersey, where he was instrumental in the development of a new link in the U.S. anti-missile system. He has served as a technical advisor on films, including The Conversation, Enemy of the State, and the TV show Threat Matrix, and he was featured in the BBC Emmy Award-winning documentary Confessions of a Dangerous Man in the 1980s about the life of fugitive CIA agent Frank Terpel. Odyssey of an Eavesdropper is Kaiser's first book. So please, after the program, we're selling the books in the back of the room. And also there's evaluations on your chairs. Please fill those out, and I'll be collecting those after the program as well. And also we have the microphone set up in the middle of the room for any questions or comments or anything after the discussion. Okay? Enjoy the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. How a little guy from just barely on the right side of the... Oh, I have to use the mic?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I guess I have to sit down. How's that? Okay. All right. It's comfortable here. How a little guy from just barely on the right side of the tracks in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania got to where I am today just absolutely amazes me. I lived close to the tracks for the first 10 years of my life and then moved to uptown Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And back in that era, coal was king, Wilkes-Barre being the center of the anthracite region. I struggled my way through school and prep school, and then finally got out of town as fast as I could and found a job at RCA Laboratories in Princeton, starting as a test tube washer. Within 6 years, I was one of their junior engineers, so to speak, and I'd worked on a whole variety of projects, many of which you'll recognize in everyday life. Probably as I was driving over here, I noticed all the light-emitting diodes and all the traffic lights, and that project was one of mine that I worked on many years ago. I did a lot of image conversion devices, tubes called image orthicons, which no longer exist today, but they converted a picture, or converted an object into a picture on a TV screen. And as I worked my way through and up in that in the laboratory, a friend of mine came to me and said, "Well, how'd you like to run a project in Barbados, West Indies?" And it sounded really good. I didn't know where Barbados was, but West Indies caught my ear. So my wife and I moved to Barbados along with our 2 children, who were 3 and 5 at the time, and I designed and developed an over-horizon radar system. Over-horizon radar, unlike normal radar, which can only see to the horizon, can actually see all the way around the world. I put up 2 huge antenna sites and a trailer load of equipment, another trailer load in Jamaica, and has been a wonderful year in Barbados. But toward the end of the project, I was working for RCA on an Air Force contract. The project manager came to me and he said, "Well, we have a Raytheon system also in the bidding group. Why don't you review their proposal?" So I did, and I awarded the follow-up contract to Raytheon, which was a $68 million contract. So you can imagine the reward that RCA gave me for doing that. I had to find a new home and a new area to live in. When I came back from Barbados, I started my own company, and we're talking 1963 now. I didn't have the slightest idea of what I was going to do, but I knew I could deal with electronic circuitry. It was just a natural thing to me. I've never had a course in electronics in my life. And I picked up the phone and called Armco Steel, which was the first company listed in the Baltimore telephone directory. And I asked them if they had anything that was broken, and they did. And I went down and in a matter of a few hours fixed it for them. And within a month or two, I had over 50 industrial customers in Baltimore, which covered Armco Steel, all the steel companies in the Baltimore area, all the plastic companies, all the bottling companies, just a huge array of customers. And it was really a interesting time because I was able to see how drinking straws are made, how Clorox bottles are made, how steel is made, how ice cream cones are made, just the real nitty-gritty of how the packaging we receive in an average day in our lives. And eventually I bumped into a brewery, and they had me come fix some beer making equipment, or beer processing equipment. And I became very good friends with the cockroaches in the brewery. I named them all, and they recognized me and waved their little antennas when I pulled in the morning. And it was important, especially in small contract breweries, to bring the temperature of the machinery down to room temperature before starting the bottling process. Well, all of the workers in the brewery, including myself, were not permitted to allow the beer to reach the floor. So we all stood there with our mugs and consumed beer as fast as we could until the machinery cooled down. Obviously, I became quite inebriated in the process, and I left, and I was driving around Baltimore, and I saw this sign that said U.S. Army Intelligence, Fort Holabird, Maryland. And I thought, well, they have to have something that's broken too. So I pulled into the intelligence center, and I knocked on a door that said supply. And sure enough, they had a box full of bugs and debugging equipment they wanted me to fix for them. At that point in time, they were using commercially available equipment to do their job, which seems kind of crude for an intelligence agency. But I repaired a number of devices for them, including all their lie detectors, and I learned how lie detectors work and how to defeat lie detectors. Just a helpful hint, if you ever get to have a lie detector test, just get a little watch battery and put it between your toes. Every time they ask you a question, just squeeze your toes and the needles will fly all over the place, and you can neutralize a lie detector. So anyhow, I started doing that, and they had an allocation tag on each and every one of the products, and I asked them with a price on it. I asked them if that's what they were really paying for this equipment. And they said it was, and I said, well, why don't you have me manufacture just what you want for your purposes? And they agreed to that arrangement. So the first product I produced was this little black box here called the 1059 amplifier, and it's been the standard of the spy business since 1964. I made thousands upon thousands of them. Last count it was around 18,000. But it takes any kind of microphone at the input, and it puts out signals to tape recorders or headsets or whatever you want it to do. But it's purely a countermeasure, meaning finding bugs type amplifier. It has a built-in tone generator, so if you find a pair of wires in a wall and you clip onto them, you can hear there's a microphone in the room somewhere. You simply throw the tone generator on, and the tone will come out of the microphone wherever it happens to be hidden in the wall. That's just one of its many, many features. At the same time, I started manufacturing various types of bugging equipment, and I built bugs out of everything I could think of. I started with very simple, what are known as quick drop bugs, little half-inch square devices that you hook a 9-volt battery to and drop it somewhere. It's a quick drop. It's just designed as a disposable device. You go in to visit somebody, you stuff it in the chair cushion, and you just forget about it. Back then they were selling for $40, so it wasn't a major expense item. So I developed a whole bunch of bugs as fast as I could, and I thought, well, I better develop the countermeasure or the detection equipment to find these things, because they were really a threat to everybody around. So I built that bug detector right there with the antenna, and that particular one, by the way, is the first one I showed J. Edgar Hoover many, many years ago when I met with J. Edgar Hoover. I think he liked me because the L in my name is Luther. So here he had another Martin Luther, and Martin Luther seemed to be his favorite, and he really enjoyed having me there. When I went into his office, his chair was on a platform, and he had sawed the legs off the sofa, so I would be down low and he would be up high. But I sat in the arm of the sofa just so I could be eye to eye with him. I think you like that. So all of these products came out of this whole thing. I made kits consisting of all of these things. I was able to move in and out of virtually every intelligence agency in the United States and some foreign countries like it was everybody's friend. I didn't have to sign guest books, didn't have to check myself in. I had good ideas to present to them, and when they came up with an idea, I ran back and within a matter of days developed a new product. This product here is a good example of that. For example, that's the 1059 audio amplifier, and this is the 2049 bomb detection amplifier. So within 2 days, I took the board in there, added some circuits to it, designed a silk screen, printed the silk screen, painted the boxes, put them in. When I say I mean I. It's me. I've never had as many as more than 7 employees at any one time, and that's when the really big stuff was going on during the wind up of the Vietnam War and the wind down, and we had a lot of racial strife in the country, and that's when the demand for this type of equipment was really at a peak. So I started, as I say, in the 63-64 era, and in 1968 they passed a law called the Omnibus Crime Bill, which is 18 U.S.C. 2512, and it restricted the manufacture of bugging equipment. Under the law, it said it's illegal to manufacture, possess, sell, offer for sale, carry, or ship in interstate commerce any device that is primarily designed for surreptitious interception of oral communication. Sounds complicated. But it was a highly flawed law, and basically the way it was written, you could go into a Radio Shack and buy a pile of resistors, a pile of capacitors, some wire to wind some coils, and a transistor to make a bug, walk out the door, and the FBI could arrest you on the doorstep because you have the components thereof to build an eavesdropping device. And that's what was so silly about the law. But the way I saw the law was when they said the device has to be primarily designed for surreptitious interception of oral communication. I saw it as something where you have to change the operation and utility of something. Like if you take a stapler and make it a bug stapler, you now change the operational utility of that stapler from a stapler to a bug stapler. So that's, I think, is what they were talking about in the law, but it didn't really, I mean, a lot of people are spending time in jail because of that law, unfortunately. So anyhow, built into that law, and by the way, I just brought this stack of photos, and anybody who wants to go through them, these are some of the hundreds of products I've designed. I've designed and developed over 600 different products over the years for countermeasure, bomb detection, and bugging type stuff, and you can just go through them and see what they look like. With that law in mind, I was trying to sell my products within the law, and I had a 2-page catalog. This is my little catalog, and you can see here is a little wall socket outlet bug, and this is an actual wall socket itself with a bug built into it. And I was trying to market these devices, but it's kind of a difficult situation because how do you tell somebody your manufacturing device without telling them? They have to say, well, by the way, do you manufacture a wall socket bug? And you say, yes, I have a wall socket bug here. So that's the way it has to work. They have to ask you. So I kept operating my business under those rules, waiting for people to ask me, but it wasn't that hard because everybody knew me. And when one agency, oh, I was a terrible person. When one agency would buy one of these things, I would run over to the other agency and say, hey, that agency has one of those. You better buy this debugging device to find it. So then I would sell tons of debugging stuff. Terrible person. But anyhow, in 1972, this company came into being, this audio intelligence devices, and all they manufactured was eavesdropping equipment. This is their catalog. This is my catalog I just showed you. This is their catalog. And the very first page, it says, we maintain an in-depth inventory of surveillance equipment. Well, how can you do that under the law? So I wrote to my congressman, I wrote to my senators, I wrote to my congresswoman, I wrote to the attorney general. My attorney generals go all the way back to Attorney General Levy and before. I go back to Congressman Long, if you ever heard of him in the history of Congress. But we're talking a long time ago. So I went to all these people and I said, how can you allow that company to do that, and you won't allow me to do it. So they sent back a letter saying, well, you do what you think is correct, and if you're wrong, we'll arrest you. That's basically what it said. So I tried the best I could, and of course, once that company came on the scene, my sales went virtually to zero. But fortunately, as I say, we had racial strife. Vietnam War was going up and down, so I shifted more over into the bomb side of things. And it was an interesting side, and I'll get on to that. But I was still selling countermeasure equipment to large corporations, Fortune 500s, selling to private eyes and things. So when you have a four-person company, it doesn't take a lot of sales to keep everybody alive. And I managed to keep us all alive. Built into the Omnibus Crime Bill was an automatic 5-year review period. So that 5-year review period would have been 1973. But they didn't get their act together until 1975. And they came to me and they said, well, it was Rich Vermeer and Tim Oliphant, I can tell you their names, came to me and said, well, we are the investigators for the House Select Committee on Intelligence, and we are here to see how the Omnibus Crime Bill is affecting you. So I complained, of course, about that company there, saying it was impacting on my sales. And I said, but here, if you want to know what I've sold, here they are. And I gave them all my files of every piece of bugging device I ever sold to anybody. And in that huge pile of paperwork was a U.S. recording company. And I thought, well, or they thought, I knew who U.S. recording company was, because when I went to the FBI, they said, we never buy anything direct. We have this phony front called U.S. Recording Company. We buy everything through U.S. Recording Company. So I told the committee people, I said, U.S. Recording Company is the FBI. Well, one thing led to another, and I had appeared before Congress and gave a statement, not to that effect, but complaining about that. As it turned out, that phony front was owned personally by the high-level management of the FBI. They would take the product shipped to U.S. Recording Company, mark them up anywhere from 30 to 270% before they turned them over to the Bureau. They funneled $24 million through that little company, of which they personally pocketed $7.5 million. They built a little country club out in western Maryland called the Blue Ridge Rod and Gun Club, and they had gaming tables and dancing girls and everything you wanted. So if you were a good FBI agent and you made a big score on something, you go out there and did your wheels and things. Burned down the day before I testified. So they must have known something was going to come. They claimed it was an 8-year-old boy playing with matches. Sounds good to me. So obviously, after I gave my testimony before Congress, my sales fell right smack to zero. I mean, literally they went from about $500,000 a year, and the next year it was $750, and the year after that, and ever since it's been zero. So I concentrated on the bomb area, and things went well there. People were blowing each other up all over the world, and every time I heard about a bombing, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division would send me the forensic evidence on it, and I would decide what kind of bomb it was, whether it was a truck bomb or a letter bomb, and what was the fusing system, what was the thought process that went on, because I can think, I hate to say that, but I can think like a bomber, just like I used to think as a bugger and a counter bugger. So I can think like a bomber, although I don't build bombs, but I can think as a counter bomb guy. Now, I've sort of gone off track here. But anyhow, I kept myself busy doing that. In about 1976, 77, a lot of my good customers, and I consider them good friends, it was a group of what I would refer to as super patriots. The CIA and the State Department found itself totally unable to handle terrorists throughout the world. So they would turn these guys loose, and they would take care of the job single-handedly. Frank Turple, for example, who I consider one of my dearest friends, he's a wanted terrorist. That's good. Nice to know one or two. He was personally responsible for taking Idi Amin out of Uganda. He sat to his right-hand side when he flew Idi out of Uganda up to France. He did the same thing with Jean-Claude Dulier in Haiti, another despot. Flew him up to some place in Spain. He went over to Libya and got Muammar Gaddafi to stop killing people, which is a good plus. He couldn't get rid of Gaddafi, but he got rid of the killing. And he's working several jobs. I know a number of people that have done that. Marshal Sohoyan was in charge of the despot in Zambia. Bill Berry was responsible for several South American despots. I know all these people personally because they would come to me about this whole business. It was a very small business, and these guys were literally super patriots operating on their own. About 1978, the United States government decided that wasn't such a good idea to have people like that being successful in removing these people from their countries. So they arrested them all. Frank was lured to Jamaica, arrested by the Secret Service, I think, taken to New York City. He had already been tried and convicted in absentia and sentenced to 35 years, but they hadn't even gotten their hands on him yet. They put him in the bowels of the New York City jail. The next morning he woke up, the jail door was open. He walked out of the jail, went out and got a cab, went to Washington, got his passport, and left to Libya. Just like that. I mean, you know, these people they're just unbelievable people. So I saw the same thing happening to Edwin Duncan, and Edwin Duncan ran a bank in North Carolina called Northwestern Bank. It was a little country bank, and it was built on moonshine money. He liked to refer to his daddy running his bank out of his hip pocket, because that's what he did. All the moonshiners would bring their cash to Duncan Sr., and he would launder it and put it into investments and send it back to him whenever they needed money. He was a good old boy, I'm telling you. That's nice to have a guy like that. So his son took it over, Ed Duncan Jr., and he was the one that provided funding to all these super patriots to run these special operations. I was involved in an operation he had in the Cayman Islands. I have a home in the Cayman Islands, and so I was involved in that situation in a roundabout way. Too long a story to tell. So they indicted Ed Duncan misapplying $100,000 in bank funds. They eventually convicted him on misapplying $675. But the way our legal system works, the sentencing is not based on what you're convicted of, it's based on what you're charged with. So they sentenced him to 18 years in jail for $675. At the same time, when they were pleading for help, they said, "Come help us." So I went to the Northwestern Bank in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, and they said the FBI is going around and they're monitoring all our people, recording them, intimidating them, threatening them, and he said, "We want to know everything they say to our employees." So I sold them pocket recorders, and I installed a bug in the office, in one of the offices in the bank. Well, it was an interesting trip because I knew the FBI well enough to know that they had the office bugged. I didn't want to disrupt their activity too much. So I put a bug in an office, and it wasn't a bug, it was just one of these teeny-weeny little microphones. These are the microphones we use in bugging devices, little teeny things. So I put it in the wall socket, but it was not a device primarily designed for surreptitious interception. I didn't change a thing. What I did, I took the cover off the telephone jack, I connected the microphone to it, wound it around my finger, put the cover back on, and the purpose for that was when they took the cover off, it would go boing, it'd pop out, sort of like the gun that goes bang, you know, when the flag comes down. I didn't want them to miss that it was there, but I already knew that they knew it was there. So shortly thereafter, I was indicted on 3 counts of interstate transportation of a device to bug the FBI, bugging the FBI, and conspiracy to do something else. I don't even remember what that was. And I thought, well, this is interesting. We're really going to have a battle now. They've been beating up my friends and beating up Ed Duncan, my friend Ed Duncan. I'm going to beat them up for a change. Because I was on the Gordon Liddy show the other day, last Wednesday, and I had a line all ready to use on the Gordon Liddy show, but the situation didn't arise for me to use it. But the line I was going to use is say, "Gordon, you bugged the Watergate to save the president. I bugged the FBI to save the country." And that's exactly what I did. I was trying to save the country. So, of course, you go before a grand jury and do your thing before a grand jury. I took the Fifth Amendment 150 times. I put it on a 3x5 card, and I put one in my pocket, and after taking the Fifth Amendment 75 times, I pulled the second one out and said, you know, sorry, and somebody said, "Oh, the first one wore out," and that was to break the tension. So I then went to, let's see, when I came out of the grand jury room, the paralegal said to me, "Tell me exactly what you saw in there." So I told him, "Oh, the prosecuting attorney was here, and the recorder was there, and the grand jury was here, and the FBI agent was sitting over there." He said, "What?" He said, I said, the FBI was sitting there. He said, you realize it's a federal crime for an FBI agent or any agents of the government to sit in on somebody's grand jury hearing? I said, no, I don't know that. So he called for a special hearing, and naturally he was going to take the stand and say, I wasn't there. He'd have to. He'd be guilty of crime. And I would take the stand and say, yes, he was there, so how else do you do it? You get the names and addresses of the grand jurors. So before I even went to trial, I had the names and addresses of the grand jurors that indicted me. So I figured I better set that list aside, which I did, and I went through the trial, and I was acquitted, and it was an interesting series of events there. I think the most notable event was the FBI put their technical expert on the stand and said, will you please explain how you found this bug in the wall? And he went through about 6 hours of explanation, and after he was finished, my attorney stood up and said, would you tell the jury where you got the equipment to do that job? He pointed to me. He said, oh, Marty over there. So it was really a sad state of affairs in a roundabout way. So I went through a trial and got acquitted. After I got acquitted, I wrote to all the grand jurors, and I said, look what you people did to me. You cost me this much money. You cost me this much in lost business. And I just wanted you to know that this is what happened as a result of your activity. A few months after I got acquitted, the two FBI agents who caused me to be indicted sued me for $22 million, claiming I caused them mental anguish. The one agent said I aggravated the sty in his eye, and the other agent said I aggravated his hemorrhoidal condition. I made the front page of papers worldwide. Kaiser, pain in the ass, says FBI. But nothing here in the United States of America. Not a thing. Not a thing on my trial. So when they brought that civil suit, I turned around and sued the Bureau for libel, abuse of power, and abuse of process. And as a result, got all of the FBI files on me. And sitting on top of that pile of files were all 24 of the original letters I had sent to those grand jurors. The FBI must have gone out and intimidated the hell out of those people under various things. And that was interesting to see. And my biggest mistake in this whole series of events was they gave me these 4,000 documents to review, and as I sat there in this room reviewing them, there was a copy machine to the right side, and I regret not copying some of those documents. But it was interesting to see what the FBI collects on you, because they were still back in the paper days. J. Edgar Hoover started off as a card cataloger in the bowels of Congress. And then eventually when he got tired cataloging books, he started cataloging people. And that's how the FBI came into existence. It just expanded from one to the other. So they were still in the paper mode back then. The internet wasn't really going yet. Data collection by computers wasn't going yet. But they had me at 5 places at exactly the same time. And I said, I will admit that I was here. The government sent me here. I will give you my airline tickets. I will show you the purchase order. I'll just get the other 4 out of the file. They were not correct. And they said, we can't. I said, well, why not? He said, well, we have to know what our informants are doing. And that, my people, is the problem with what's going on with data collection today. There's all of this data coming in from all directions. During the civil process, you do what I think are called interrogatories. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a maker of wares here. And I would be sitting at the table, my attorney would be sitting there, the FBI agent would come in, and my attorney would always ask him for all the days he showed up, are you wearing your FBI badge? Yes, I am. Are you carrying your FBI gun? Yes, I am. Did you come here in your FBI car? Yes, I did. Are you still on FBI time? Yes, I am. And they say, well, what are you doing here? And you say, right now I'm a private citizen. And you say, what do you mean private citizen? You just can't take off one hat and throw on another. And under the ethics code of the FBI, they are all the time FBI. They can't be civilians. It cost me $375,000 in legal fees to fight these guys. $375,000. Finally, I just gave up. I just couldn't do it anymore. It had impacted on my family. It impacted on my health. It really had impacted mostly on what I thought of this country. I could not stand to see an agent of the FBI lying to a grand jury, lying before a court, not having a judge stop him from doing that, so he becomes part of this conspiracy of lies. And we see it right now today with the President of the United States. You get all these falsehoods, you got tons of people to cover him up and say he did everything right, he's right, you can do this and this and that. Not true. Really not true. So anyhow, I continued on. While I was at trial, every weekend I would fly back to my shop, manufacture equipment, and on Monday morning fly back down to trial. I mean, that was a routine for like 3 weeks going on, back and forth. So I still maintained my business. And I was doing very well in the bomb business, developing a whole bunch of products. Every time a new bomb came along, I had an answer for it. My specialty, improvised bombs, letter bombs, car bombs, nail bombs, and nail bombs I'm talking about, pressure bombs. And I see them in Iraq all the time. You hear about roadside bombs. And I had detectors for all of this thing. And I was dealing primarily with the bomb data center at Huntsville, Alabama, which was run by the United States Army. So I still had it into the Army, which was not the FBI. And I could share my ideas with them. I shared my ideas with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. I was selling these bomb suits. Here's a picture of me and a guy with a bomb suit on. And one of the interesting, this thing down here is a water cannon, or what's called a water disruptor. And it takes 2 ounces of water, you put it in the barrel, and you fire it at a suspect bomb, and it rips the bomb apart faster than the bomb can go off. This is every time you see one, like the fellow that they recently shot at an American Airlines flight. He got off. He was psychologically unbalanced. And you saw the thing go bang, and the thing flew in the air, and that was a water cannon that did that kind of thing. They're fired remotely by wire. So I was selling those bomb suits and those disruptors, and I had my whole line of Doppler stethoscopes, ultrasonic stethoscope, inductive stethoscopes, and all these kind of things. And in 1999, for reasons unknown, the FBI was given control of the bomb data center. And my sales went to zero, just like that. Hard to believe. You know, here's a guy trying to help this country, and they're saying, sayonara, we just don't need you anymore. And I keep looking at these new things that are occurring in the world, and there's very little I can do to help. And the problem with the FBI is that everybody has to go to them for intelligence. If you're the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or if you're the Drug Enforcement Administration, you have to go to the FBI to see what they have on file for intelligence information. And if you're dealing with Marty Kaiser, and believe me, it's as simple as this, if you're dealing with Marty Kaiser, you get no intelligence until you stop dealing with Marty Kaiser. And that's a sad state of affairs. But during the Duncan, Turple, Shohoyan era, when all these Patriots were being bashed into the ground, and I was being bashed into the ground, it was the 1978, 1980 strata. Again, I filed several suits under the Freedom of Information Act, and here's a letter from the Central Intelligence Agency. It says here, this is in response to your attorney's letter dated 29 September 1976. And the answer is dated March 1984. That's what I call really swift. Really swift. Of course, by that time, you'd have to read the language of this thing. It's unbelievable. They deny that anything exists, including the United States government. They're in a denial stage. When you file a Freedom of Information Act, you generally get stuff that looks like this, blacked out. Here's a good page. This is the way it comes in. It looks like that. Okay, so what I tried to do was look at these names that have been checked off up here. Here's Mr. Callahan. He got fired because of the U.S. recording company scandal. Mr. Adams, ooh, he's a good guy. Mr. Gallagher, he got fired. Ooh, that can't be. Deep Throat. There's Felt there. So he's on there. So, you know, he shows up in a bunch of these things because he's just circulated around and around and around. So I tried to work from here and develop a matrix going down to find out where the bad guys were that are causing this problem. But Marshall Sahoyan, my good friend, went to one of the classes held by Morton Halpern, who was one of the fellows that penned the Freedom of Information Act. And he said, no, you're doing it the wrong way. What you do is go down here to who it's carbon to. and then go to those people and get one of them that hasn't been blacked out like this. So he did that, and his matrix led him to a level that is unbelievable. I don't want to mention his name here, but it goes right up to the highest levels of government. So he was successful, but there isn't much we can do about it because the man is still running around out there doing things. So how are we doing here? We have, want to go to questions now? Okay. That's my publicist. All right. I think I've told my story. The book, which looks like this, is Odyssey of an Eavesdropper. Bob Stokes, my writer, was around in that era of all this thing, the hearings before the Congressional Committee, the destruction of that strata of super patriots. And Bob is a world accomplished writer. His bio is in here if you want to read about him, but he's quite a writer. And as they mentioned in the introduction, I did the movie Enemy of the State. And Enemy of the State was made out of two occurrences. The Baltimore Sun paper wrote a 6-part Sunday magazine article about the National Security Agency, which is right in Baltimore. It was very interesting. Jerry Bruckheimer picked up on that. He liked the concept of the NSA. It was a new agency that hadn't been bashed around like the FBI and the CIA. So they needed somebody to connect the NSA to the world, and they found my website with my FBI story on it. And they said, here is our Enemy of the State. So they took those two, sent them to David Marconi, the screenplay writer in Britain, and then he sent back the initial script, and then I took over from that point. All the technology you'll see in Enemy of the State, I manufacture, or I did manufacture back when I manufactured things. It was kind of a fun movie. I can't say much more. I did, of course, the movie Confessions of a Dangerous Man, and that was about Frank Turple. And it was banned here in the United States. They couldn't show it here in this country, which is kind of ridiculous because it's going through a satellite link, and anybody with a satellite antenna could see the thing if they wanted to. By the way, Frank Turple is now sitting at the right hand of Fidel Castro. So let's see what he can do. Let's see what he can do.
Do you think that the suits against you were instigated by Hoover personally, and also do you think the problems with the FBI are structural nature, systemic nature, or individual?
I think the suit against me was driven by the Secretary of State of the United States of America. He was the power broker behind all these things. I'll let you remember who he was, but because I don't want to use his name. I think that was who was driving the thing. And of course, Hoover died by the time my suit occurred. So I guess I was dealing with Clarence Kelly. And after I exposed the corruption, I went to him and stood right in front of him and apologized because I had no idea what was going to happen. I've received a lot of criticism along that line saying, well, you know, when you're ratting the federal agency, you're going to get it. And I said, well, I didn't know that because they were all my friends. But I learned quickly, I'll tell you that. Yeah, I don't think Hoover, the Hoover or the Hooverites had anything to do with it. I think it was driven by the State Department.
You mentioned the movie The Conversation. I was going to ask you that before you started talking. And so you were a consultant on that film?
Yes, and I didn't realize I was until I was, because I was the fellow making all this stuff, and they had to find equipment for Hackman to use in this process. So I taught the telephone technique of pushing the button up and down and listening to this and listening to that. I told them all about it. I never charged them a dime for that. Never charged them a dime. It's just that, they called me on the phone, and I was so excited about the business I was in, I just spoke freely to them about the various technologies.
Well, my question, I was going to ask you whether it was authentic, but clearly since they talked to you, everything they put in the movie must have been pretty authentic.
Not really.
No?
The parabolic, and I insisted on that in Enemy of the State, that they not use parabolic microphones. Parabolic microphones do not work. The ones they were looking at with a parabola on them. Let me tell you a little bit about parabolic microphones. When you hear them being used in a football game, What they're doing is they're mixing in all the parabolic microphones with all the microphones around the field, and they can effectively, by electronically delaying the signal, they can effectively make a parabola almost as big as the stadium itself. So they're gathering all that audio from all these sources and making it sound as if it's coming from that one little microphone. But to stand on top of a building and point it at somebody, no way.
Okay, but I have a more important issue than the technology, and that is you mentioned J. Edgar Hoover and liking the fact that your name was Martin L.
Yeah.
But you also talked about Martin Luther King, and my question that relates to the movie is, in the movie, Gene Hackman starts to realize that there are consequences
Yes.
to what he's doing.
That's right.
Which leads to people getting killed. Right. And I'm wondering, based on your experience with the FBI and all these government agencies, and what happened in the 60s and 70s, what's your moral take on this business is and what the government is up to? Because Martin Luther King was bugged by the FBI,
right?
And a lot of people who a lot of people who studied it think that the government probably was involved somehow in his death. Yeah. So go ahead.
Okay. The BBC just did a documentary on the assassination of Martin Luther King, and they had me help them with the motel that he stayed in. He occupied 2 rooms, and the FBI was in the 2 rooms adjacent to his room. And they used 2 microphones, which most likely were mine, because I was, to the best of my knowledge, I was their only supplier at that time, on each side, and recovering the conversations that way. So the technology was used in eavesdropping, but it's just so hard to say where this intelligence goes, whether that really played an important part in somebody's assassination. But my attorney was the guy that would know, and it was Bud Fensterwall, and he was a specialist in conspiracies. And he was really hung up on the John F. Kennedy conspiracy. And I remember his matrix board in his office. He had a huge board with names all along the side, and he had strings going back and forth to see where they intersected at points of times and everything. So he was big in that, and he probably could have handled the Martin Luther King conspiracy also.
Are you saying that they were bugging him on the day that he was killed?
I don't know when he stayed in the hotel in Birmingham. I don't know. Was he assassinated in Birmingham?
No, it was in Memphis. It was
in Memphis. Okay.
There was a story in the Tennessee papers that Army intelligence actually had him under surveillance at the moment he was shot.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind they did. Yeah. I have to live with that all the time too. When I got my FBI files, I had a friend by the name of Marion Wright who has since died. And whenever he came out of the shop, I'd say, come up to the house and have a sandwich or something. So I'd take him up to the house and we'd have a sandwich. And lo and behold, when I got my FBI files, there was a report by Marion Wright that he had gone to my house and had a ham sandwich. I mean, why bother to collect data like that? But that's the thought process of these guys. They say absolutely everything. And people are still filing suits under the Freedom of Information. I have a hard time with that Freedom of Information Act.